Hey everyone, so glad to have you tuning in to another episode of the Searching for Truth podcast. My name is Ryan, and today with me is Adam Kemp. Today's episode is going to run a little differently. Instead of a testimony, Adam and I will be discussing deep questions relating to the theme of objective and subjective truth. A few things we'll be discussing will include what objective and subjective truths are, why it's important to differentiate them, and how truth relates to God and faith, especially when it comes to moral truth and reasoning. Alrighty, let's jump into it. Hey Adam, thank you for having me, Ryan, on our show. Yeah, it's so good to have you today. First of all, we want to get to know who you are. So just briefly, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm not quite much of a remarkable person, but I'll try and be brief. I do a honors in international relations. I think you had another guest on that did something similar, international
Yeah,
studies.
Mitch.
Yeah, I think international.
That is, yeah.
Basically the same thing. I come from a family of migrants. I'm originally from New Zealand. My dad's side originally from the United Kingdom and Ireland, and my mother's side's from Italy. I have three dogs, all of quite big breeds, so it's quite a tumultuous household, to say the least.
Tell me about your upbringing and what led you to faith in Jesus.
Yeah, of course. Well, I was born Catholic, um, but if there's one thing you should know about Italians, it's a very cultural kind of Catholicism. I didn't quite grasp what the gospel meant for me, let alone what the good news actually was. But I think, especially after COVID, a lot of people, including myself, had these questions of purpose. Is there anything greater to aspire for in life? And so I started delving a lot into the question of faith. I joined my local Christian club at university, and I also delved into other faiths. So I read parts of the Quran, I read parts of the Book of Mormon, I read into commentaries on other religions. Um, but I thankfully came running back to Jesus, realizing just the fullness of truth that he had, recognizing that he can live up to the promises that he makes in the Gospels. And so I'm still thankfully quite devout in my Catholic faith and beliefs.
So do you feel like you finished searching for truth, like you've found the truth?
I don't think we can ever stop searching for truth,
Okay.
but I think now I have a firm foundation through Jesus and through the church. And I think with this in mind, I can continue on my journey of discovering other parts of truth, knowing that Jesus is a firm foundation that won't let me down.
Yeah, that's really cool. We're going to be looking at objective and subjective truth. So, first of all, we've got to work out what the difference is. I'd say objective truth is like a known fact, it's a concrete truth in a sense, can't be questioned, it's universal. It's not a matter of opinion or belief. Objective truth can be theological, but it doesn't have to be. There's objective truth in science, maths, and history, which is based on evidence. How would you describe objective truth?
Objective truth, I'd be agreeing with that definition. I'd say that objective truth is kind of the universal shared experiences that we have. Um, Basically, the correspondence we have between the human perception of the world and how the world actually is. The prime example I always like to give is that every human recognizes that the sun radiates both heat and warmth. That's a universal experience of the external world that we have. That's my go to example.
And subjective truth, on the other hand, it's relative, right? It's quite literally meaning it is dependent on the subject or the person. It's what an individual believes, their truth, their experience, And it's relative because their subjective truth is what they've experienced in life and what factors have contributed to their sense of belief or truth. How would you define subjective truth? I would also go along the same lines. I would draw a lot from Kierkegaard, who was a Christian philosopher who actually talks quite well about subjective truths to a certain extent. Subjective truths help us also decide certain decisions that we do in our lives. For instance, you can have the objective facts of if you want to be a doctor, it pays well, you learn a lot of stuff.
That's true.
But the subjective truth is if you want to do it, if you actually are capable of being a doctor, and these subjective truths can help us with decision making. To give it in a Christian context as well, ministry, the objective truths of ministry, that it's good to be a teacher to others, to minister to people, be a big component in the Christian community. But then the subjective truths would be, are you an extrovert? Can you go out and speak the truths of the gospel? Can you discuss these hard-hitting questions? And that's where I think subjective truth actually does have quite a bit of merit. Yeah, so both objective truth and subjective truth are important in different ways. Yes, objective truth is big picture, whereas subjective truth is important for your individual life and your experiences. Yeah, both forms of truth, they definitely influence how we conduct our lives, I believe. No one lives their lives on falsehoods. Exactly.
Yeah.
Why is it important to differentiate objective and subjective truth?
Part of me believes it's important because, like I said, the way that we conduct our lives is heavily informed by truth. I gave the merits of subjective truth, but there's also a lot of danger with subjective truth. This idea that at its worst, subjective truth is just anything that I like to do is how I should be making decisions in the world, which is going to cause a lot of problems for yourself and for others around you.
So it's an egocentric point of view.
Yeah, very egotistical, very what philosophers like Stirner would say is the primacy of the individual in making their decisions, in making sure you get the best for yourself.
So it's an inward focus rather than thinking about the environment and the bigger picture. And you've got to always consider objective truth as well, because if you just focus on subjective truth and your life, then that becomes very self-centered and very self-focused. Elements of subjective truth may be objective, but not all of subjective truth can be objective because it's from one person's experience. So, for example, if an individual believes in a God and a God exists, then that's an objective truth and a subjective truth. So there's an overlap there. But if an individual believes that they're somehow superior than someone else, that's a subjective truth that isn't an objective truth.
Yeah.
So it's important to differentiate them because you can't use subjective truth as evidence for objective truth. You can't say because I think this, then everyone thinks this. You've actually got to search for objective truth.
Yes, it becomes quite an emotional way of comprehending the world, which is not to say that it's necessarily a wrong thing. Emotions are very important. I think anyone that does psychology would agree with that. But it can't be the be all end all of how we acquire knowledge about the world.
Exactly. Yeah. How are objective truth and God interlinked?
Ooh,
Big question.
very big question. I'm gonna go with my Catholic understanding of this question and talk about how St. Thomas Aquinas discusses this issue. and say that objective truth and God are interlinked because of this notion of causation. So, for instance, why did I come to this podcast today? Well, I came here because I want to talk about this topic, which is the cause. I want to talk about this topic because I'm interested in theology, which is caused by my upbringing, which is caused by so on and so on and so on. And Thomas Aquinas says that this link of causation keeps going back to something called the uncaused causa, which is God. He argues that this is God. So these truths that we have, that I'm here because I want to talk about theology, that the sun radiates heat and warmth because of chemical reactions, which is caused by energy, gravity. I'm not an astronomer, mind you, but that's my understanding of it. These are caused and caused and caused until the original cause, which is uncaused, which is God.
So it's a causal chain of events.
Yeah,
If it had to have a starting point for it to actually happen,
exactly.
to actually cause other things to cause other things.
Yeah, well, that's exactly how truth can be objective, though, is that something exists or is in reality because it is caused by something, and then again, so on.
So it's a law, really. It's a law of causation.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not too sure the specifics necessarily, but from my understanding of Aquinas, that is how he would explain the issue of objective truth and its link with God.
So it's like a law, like we have the law of gravity, law of like inertia, different things, different laws. The law of causation is one because we know that things don't just happen because they happen. Something made them happen.
Yes.
I'm not here just because I randomly appeared here. I'm here because I walked into the building. I'm here because we're doing a podcast episode. There's a reason, there's a cause. And then you can track it all the way back to, well, how did the first thing happen? What caused the start of the universe? It's a big question.
Yeah.
I was watching a video. Have you heard about Alex O'Connor before?
I have. Yeah, yeah. I actually enjoy a few of his topics. He actually engages a lot with these ideas, especially from C.S. Lewis. I think he talks about Thomas Aquinas. Yes, but even other faith traditions as well. So, yeah, yep, definitely heard of them.
Alex O'Connor is a agnostic philosopher on YouTube. And he kind of describes one of the strongest arguments for the existence of God in one of his videos. And there was two parts to the argument. The first part was that there's a law of causation and there's a reason for everything because something had to have caused the beginning, like we're just talking about. But he also goes on to explain another type of evidence for God. It's called the sustaining argument, that something has to be sustaining the universe and sustaining its existence. And he used a really good metaphor to describe it. Say I'm holding up my drink bottle now, and you ask, well, what is holding the drink bottle up? Well, obviously my hand is holding my drink bottle up. But what is holding my hand? Well, my arm is holding my hand up. My body is holding my arm up. What's holding my body up? The floor. What's holding the floor? The building, the levels below us. What's holding the building is the ground, the earth. The earth is held in orbit by the sun. What's holding the sun? There's this infinite chain of, like, how is this happening? Well, I'm holding a drink bottle, but it's being held up by an infinite chain of things. It's holding my hand all the way to the earth, to the universe. It's an infinite chain. And there's no one physical thing that is keeping everything from falling apart. The only explanation to this sustaining process is that something is holding everything in existence that's outside of our physical world, something with power and something with authority. So, yes, the causation argument of existence is critical to understanding that there is a God, but also you've got to ask, well, what is sustaining the universe? Something's keeping it, holding it in motion. If God just disappeared or didn't exist for a moment, everything would collapse. Everything would cease to exist because he's holding everything up. And I think that really describes the common saying of God is like holding the earth in his hands. Like if you think about that image, he's literally doing that. He's literally holding the universe together. And even though Alex O'Connor is an agnostic, which means he doesn't know if he believes in a God, that to me suggests that there is something out there. And it is evidence that there is a God holding everything together outside of time and space. And the reason for the things we find in objective truth, like science, maths, history, reality, can be used as evidence of God as well, because he's holding and propelling things in motion. Um, some people will say that those things are just evidence of existence. But then where do you find evidence for the reason for existence? Because science tends to describe things. People say that science explains things. It explains the law of this or explains biology. But all we're really doing in science is describing things.
Yeah,
Like we're describing how things work. You know what I mean?
yeah. There's this idea that science is a method, right? And that we can observe reality, and we can acquire knowledge about the world through these methods. But then that comes into question, how can we know about supernatural things? Because supernatural means outside of natural. And the scientific method can't really be used for supernatural truths. No, it can only really be used for natural truths. So then you do have this massive absence in how we can observe the world, or how we can reason with why our lives are the way they are, why the world is the way it is, because we're only looking at a certain segment of the picture.
Hmm. And the thing with science is people say that science can disprove God, but we're looking at two different realms. We're looking at science, which are things that can be physically measured, whereas God, he's outside of that. We can't physically measure God. We can't see God under a microscope or look at him through a telescope. Like we can't measure God in that sense because he is outside of space and time and matter. So people say that science can disprove God. I disagree with that because you can't measure God through science.
Yeah, most of the conclusions that philosophers come to when they examine the existence of God is that we can't know through that sort of method. We can't know through logical deduction, or scientific rationality, these sort of things. We can get a glimpse of it. So, for instance, what we were saying about the uncaused causa, or this idea of what sustains everything, but they can't. They're not proofs in and of themselves of a god. They act more as rationale to try and conceptualize um, why reality is the way it is.
And I think that's why a lot of people say, and especially philosophers say they're agnostic, because they're like, well, there's no physical evidence for God in the universe. Therefore, there's no way of knowing if God exists. And I think they're missing that kind of spiritual aspect of God.
Mm.
They're thinking, oh, you've got to connect to God through a logical pathway. But there's the spiritual aspect that we can connect with God. And I think that's really important that we explore as humans that there is something more than just physical, more than matter, more than we're more than just atoms and molecules doing everything.
Yeah.
And we're more than just the reason why this thought popped into my head was because of the last chemical reaction that happened. Well, some people think that every chemical reaction that we have going on in our brains is just a result of the previous chemical reaction. And that's what makes thought, and that's what makes consciousness. But I think there's something more than that, something more than molecules. Like we have a soul, we have spirit, and we are able to connect to God through that. We're going to move on to the next question because we covered a lot.
Yeah. That's a lot of hefty things, and we're not even halfway into the script. So
I know there's a lot to ponder there. And the next question is, we're going to relate it more to faith now. And so what does Jesus mean when he claims to be the truth in John 18?
oh, well, for context to the audience, John 18 is when Jesus is talking to Pontius Pilate just before his crucifixion, and Pilate is interrogating him. And Jesus says in verse 37 that I give testimony to the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. And he's saying this to Pontius Pilate, who replies, "What is truth?" And Pontius Pilate doesn't say this in an inquisitive manner. He's not actually interested in what truth is. He says this because he is dismissive. Truth doesn't matter to Pontius Pilate. He just wants to get this political affair over and done with. So when Jesus claims to be the truth, he is speaking to a world of indifferentism in the Roman Empire.
What does indifferentism mean?
Oh, well, in the Roman Empire, um, the Romans were quite tolerant of other faith traditions as long as they weren't too uppity or they weren't insulting the Roman emperor. So there's this idea that they were indifferent to the truth claims of the other groups that they conquered within their empire. So when Jesus is saying that he is a witness to the truth, and he also says that he is the truth in John 14, he's speaking to this objective truth of his kingdom, of how the world actually is, that God is in control, and that Jesus has that authority.
So he's talking about the spiritual kingdom rather than the physical kingdom that Pilate's used to. So Pilate's used to the power and status and the order of kings of this world. Whereas Jesus, when he says he's the truth and admitting to be the king, he's talking about a greater kingdom, a different kingdom.
Yes, he's giving, in a sense, a choice between the truth of his kingship, the truth of his salvation, or the truth of the Roman world, which is quintessential to our modern reality of indifferentism, that you can choose which side you want to be on. And I think that plays a lot into what it means for our lives. It plays a lot into what it means to be a Christian, because when Jesus says that whoever is of the truth hears his voice, he's talking about his sheep. In John 10:27, he says that his sheep listen to his voice. And so who are his sheep? It's his disciples, it's his followers. So anyone that wants truth in its most fundamental objective sense is a disciple of Jesus.
Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life.
Yes.
Jesus is saying he is the truth, like he is the embodiment of truth. What do you think that means?
I think it leads to an idea that he is both the uncaused causer. I think it says that. I wish I could give you the scripture right now, but it says that all things were made through him, for him.
And yeah,
Yeah.
go on.
And so when Jesus claims this, that he is the truth, the implication is that ultimately everything derives from him, that we can have our opinions about things, that there are different traditions, faiths in the world, but ultimately the objective truth is Jesus and his claims, which throughout the Bible, he is quite clear that he's the only way, the only right way, which is what I go back to when he gives us a choice that we can hear his voice, that anyone of the truth hears his voice, and that they're his sheep. Otherwise, the other choice is that you reject him, that he's a fool or a blasphemer, or that he's just wrong. And this is the dichotomy we're left with. You can either be for truth or you can be for falsehoods.
And the verse I think you were quoting before was Colossians 1:16, which is, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him."
I need to step up my scripture memorization then. I need to, I'll remember that one.
Yeah, it's a very good one to remember. What does this mean for our lives, that Jesus is the truth?
Well, as I was saying before, with this idea of a choice, and really only a singular choice, are we for or against him? If we are for Jesus and Jesus is right, then he acts as a compass for us to, as I said before, with truth, how we conduct our lives. If we conducted our lives simply through subjective truth, then we don't have a compass. It's just the spontaneity of what we desire.
Yeah.
But if Jesus is right and the scriptures are right and the church is right, then we have a compass to navigate how our lives should be.
So because Jesus is the truth, he's given us that choice. I mean, God's given us free will, so we're not forced either way. God wants us, because he loves us, he wants us to have the choice of choosing to follow Jesus or choosing to do our own thing. And I was talking to Mitch Dudley the other day on the podcast, and we're talking about how we're not going to know all the answers to truth and objective truth, because God's knowledge is infinitely bigger than whatever we can grasp. But we definitely can still grasp the objective truth through Jesus. So I think the way that Mitch worded it was, we won't know all the answers to truth, but we can trust in someone who knows all the truth, and that's Jesus. So because we know as humans, we're not going to find all the answers to everything, if we look to Jesus and put our trust in him, we know that we are doing God's will for us. And through Jesus and the word, we can gain wisdom on how to live our lives in accordance to God's will. So if we know that Jesus is the truth, then we know the Bible is the truth. So we can look to the word for guidance on how to live more like Jesus and live our lives knowing that there is an objective truth out there, and it's God when he sent his son, Jesus, so that we may be able to live our lives according to the word and also be able to share that with other people. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, 100%.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to call the episode right here. First of all, hats off to you for listening for the full 30 minutes. Hopefully, what we've discussed today has really sparked some deep thought. The good news is that this episode is not over, and part 2 will be released soon. Adam and I will be continuing our discussion and will be focusing on objective truth and its connection to morality. Thanks for listening again, guys. Be sure to stay tuned for upcoming episodes.